Hi, I'm Nicole Tautges. I am an agroecologist with the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. So, there's only two people. Do you want to introduce yourselves? No? Okay, that's fine. Well, I'll meet you later. So today I want to talk about birds, bees, and butterflies because these are our native important friends out in nature, and their numbers are declining sadly for a number of reasons which we'll touch on here. And there are things that we can do as homeowners, as landowners, as people in the community to give them habitat and to provide beneficial areas to help them out. And it doesn't matter if it's a small patch or a large patch, it can still have a positive impact. So we can all do something to help. So today I want to talk about the importance of pollinators and briefly go over their population declines. We're going to talk about birds, bees, and butterflies that are native here, fly through Wisconsin. And then I want to talk about how we can start a garden, what we can do to establish these beneficial areas in our own yard, on our own land. So first I want to start off with why are pollinators important? Approximately 3/4 of our food crops that humans eat that are culinarily important for people depend on wild pollination services, which means that 75% of our diets, we depend on these birds, bees, and butterflies to ensure that we have a crop to eat. So they're enormously important from a human food standpoint, but they're also really important for making sure that we keep the ecosystem going. They pollinate trees, they pollinate flowers, they pollinate even bushes, anything woody. All of these are important for providing us with shade, for providing food and habitat for other animals, for taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Very important for trees. And so this is why we want to actively work to sustain pollinator populations. Also, what's been more popularly or widely known is the declines in honeybee populations, which are really important for a lot of our flowering tree crops grown out west. Almonds, alfalfa is important for dairy, milk, cheese production. That depends on pollinators. Apples, cherries, most of our fruit depends on pollinators. So to keep those food sources around, we need to make sure that we're doing things to sustain our honeybee populations. So, first of all, I want to talk about birds. There's really only two kinds of birds in Wisconsin that pollinate, but they're both very charismatic and we like to see them. So one is orioles. What is the kind? Let's see. The Baltimore oriole is the type that we have here in Wisconsin. There are other types of orioles in other parts of the U.S. There's actually it's a diverse family, but here we have the popular, well-known Baltimore oriole. It can be identified by its orange breast and some orange stripes on its back. And it's had a lot of habitat loss at its breeding grounds. And it's also suffered from pesticide use in a variety of areas. And so most of its declines have been due to losses of habitat as humans sort of displace wild lands for agricultural use and then apply chemicals on that ag ground. Also, in the mid-20th century, Dutch elm disease infected and killed a lot of elm trees, and elm trees are an important nesting ground for orioles. And so that damaged the oriole population as well. So, but you can give orioles nectar to eat by putting out backyard feeders. And some of us probably have seen orange slices put out or as nectar for orioles. So you can do that. They like orange slices, but they also like jam as a sugary alternative. So you can even put out jam. What's funny about orioles is they really like ripe berries. So people have noticed that if you put out the dark colored, very ripe mulberries and cherries and grapes, that tends to attract them more than less ripe versions. So if you buy some of these fruits from the store, just kind of let them ripen out in the sun, and then the orioles will, and then put them on the oriole feeder, and that will tend to attract more orioles. Orange slices they like any time of year. And for oriole feeders, you want to make sure that you get the right feeder. Most of the ones sold in stores are sort of the right feeder, but you want to ensure that they have not just the tray on which to put the fruit, but they also have good areas for the orioles to perch as they eat, so that's important. So just make sure when you're selecting a feeder for orioles that they have somewhere to perch. Now, the perches are less important for ruby-throated hummingbirds because they just, their wings vibrate as they feed on the nectar. And that's the other type of important bird pollinator species that we have here. They pollinate a lot of different flowers, actually. We've all seen them. We only have the one hummingbird species that comes through Wisconsin. Those are the ruby-throated. They have sort of the red marking right here on their neck. And then they also have some green coloring on their backs as well. Hummingbirds like a variety of flowers, like I said, such as bee balm, salvias, wigelas, which is sort of a bushy plant with red or pink flowers. They like trumpet honeysuckle, and they even like bleeding hearts, which I didn't know about before I was doing research for this. So your bleeding heart bush is actually beneficial for pollinators, which is really cool. So any of those will attract hummingbirds as well as a lot of bees, and we'll come back to plant and species selection later. But particularly, if you're looking to attract hummingbirds in particular, you might choose weigela bushes, which are widely available, and trumpet honeysuckles, and those also smell really good too. When back to selecting a feeder to attract hummingbirds, hummingbirds are pretty widespread, so they're pretty easy to attract with the right feeder. They're widely available in a lot of retail stores, but what you might want to know is how to make safe hummingbird food. That's really important. You can buy sort of the pre-made mixes, but that's really not necessary at all. And many of the pre-made mixes often include a dye, and you want to avoid those because they're actually not good for the hummingbird, or they can carry a risk. And what to feed, you really only want to feed refined white sugar. Don't use honey or corn syrup, just white sugar, granulated sugar right out of the sack, and tap water is fine. And you want to mix 1 cup of sugar with 4 cups of water. And you'll just want to dilute that sugar and fill your hummingbird feeder. You can make it in larger batches and store it in the refrigerator if you like. And make sure you clean your feeder from time to time. Otherwise, they'll have sort of other insects build up. They can even get some mold on them. And then you won't be attracting hummingbirds because it smells bad. So just keep an eye on your feeder, but very simple food. You don't need to buy anything special. And we can do other things to protect birds in our environment and ensure that they live to provide us with beauty. And the number one thing you can do for birds is protect them from glass collisions. It's actually the number one cause of bird death, songbird death in the United States. So if you have windows that you see birds running into, they actually make stickers. They're pretty widely available online on Amazon. Some of them are very pretty. They're a little bird shaped and they'll just stick right on your window. So you consider getting stickers to help them see the glass a little better, and that tends to prevent collisions pretty well. Number 2 thing you can do to protect birds is don't use pesticides in your lawn or on your agricultural areas, anywhere on your land. They really have harmful effects for a lot of off-target species like birds. Another thing, keep cats indoors or safely restrained outdoors. You can use leashes, you can use kennels, but cats are a huge source of death of songbirds in the United States, and they've traced pretty large declines in the songbird population to, they've linked that to rising numbers of domestic and roaming cats. So unfortunately, our feline friends are pretty bad for our songbird friends. And then other things you can do is create pollinator gardens, which is what we're going to talk about later. Buy shade-grown coffee. Many of the birds that we see, they actually do migrate to Mexico and areas in Central and South America. And so the shade-grown coffee tends to be produced in a way that doesn't displace some of the native trees. And so we're preserving some of that canopy habitat for the birds that wouldn't exist or be kept or retained in like a traditional burn it to the ground sort of land conversion situation, as so often happens in agriculture. Also, bird experts recommend that we don't feed birds bread, but do feed them bird seed in the winter. And use wood mulch to keep the ground covered in any areas of your yard, because that tends to sustain higher insect populations, which are also important for feeding birds. It's just some things you can do to help all songbirds. And then we'll move on to butterflies. Butterflies, we've also observed large declines in butterfly populations, again, mostly to habitat loss. We've seen populations go down in North America by about 30%, 30 to 50%, to even higher in some areas. And this is really concerning. Monarch populations are getting quite low in many areas of the United States, and Wisconsin is actually a really important feeding site for monarchs when they have milkweed. And so we're going to talk about milkweed. It's their most important food source. It's the only thing that the monarch larvae eat. And so we want to, milkweed is a really important feature of our pollinator gardens. And for those of you who are here, I will give you milkweed seed. There are several different kinds of milkweeds, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But apart from Michelle, yeah, question.
So I know there is common milkweed and swamp milkweed. Which one is better?
I believe they can feed on all milkweeds, but what's most commonly and easily propagated is common milkweed.
Okay.
Yeah. There's also something called butterfly weed, which has this beautiful orange flowers, which you'll see, and that's also a milkweed, too.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. They have long, you can identify milkweeds, but they have sort of long, slender flowers, but the veins are very pronounced. And then you break the stem or the leaf, and it'll have that characteristic milky sap. Yeah, but a lot of common milkweed has the widest, fattest looking flowers. But other milkweeds, if you take a look, they look similar. They're just slender leaves. Yeah, but butterfly weed is one that I highly recommend because it's absolutely beautiful orange flower feature. It tends to bloom sort of after salvias and before the sunflowers, or the echinacea and black-eyed Susan, so it sort of is important for filling in that gap. And common milkweed itself has a very fragrant flower, even to humans, so it's totally beautiful that way. So I recommend them all, but those are the top two. I don't have a lot of experience with swamp milkweed. But apart from monarchs, there are some endangered butterflies that entomologists are working hard to preserve here in Wisconsin, and one of the most important is the Karner blue. Its numbers have dwindled quite a bit, but it's very beautiful. It's smaller than a monarch, and it has bright blue wings. And it can only feed on, oh dear, it's escaping me. I'll come back to it, I'll remember it. It can only feed on one certain plant. And so that plant is very important, and I have it later in the presentation, and I will remember. We also have skippers, they're called, or skipperlings, which are smaller and look a little bit more like moths. And so the two that are important in Wisconsin, you might hear about them, as the Poweshiek skipperling and the Beesus skipperling. And they can feed on a wide variety of flowers. So what we're going to talk about for butterfly-friendly flowers, you'll see those, and so look those up and know what those look like in case you want to watch out for them. I believe there are some Karner blue raising or fostering programs that you can enroll in, so just look online if you want to learn a bit more about the Karner blue. Just a little bit more about the butterfly declines. Some studies show that we're losing up to 2% of our butterfly populations in the continental U.S. every year. And they're seeing declines in abundant species and in rare species, so it seems to really be across the board. So there's a lot that we need to do to get more flowers and habitat for them out on the landscape, because mown grass-only lawns do nothing for butterflies or any other pollinators. Some good news about sort of lawn maintenance is that increasingly turf people are starting to incorporate clovers into turf mixes, which is really good from a nitrogen standpoint because clovers are legumes, so they fix nitrogen and they take it out of the air and they put it into the soil, which helps your grass grow better, which is sort of offsetting the need for fertilizing your lawn. Clovers are also really drought hardy. So in droughty years like what we have now, you'll see lawns with clovers actually look greener, which is nice. They don't get as crispy and crunchy. But clovers produce flowers that are actually incredibly important for pollinators. And they tend to make flowers sort of throughout the year so they can fill in the gaps for when some of these other aster species that you'll see in pollinator gardens aren't flowering. So they flower really early, and they flower in drought, and they also flower really late. So clovers are a really nice feature of landscapes that you can have in your yard. I like to see the flowers in my yard, so I just set our mower deck up a little higher to keep those flowers. In terms of your pollinator gardens, what are good butterfly-friendly flowers? You have probably seen some of this list in the garden stores. So you want to look for crooked stem aster and butterfly weed. Like I said, those are milkweed and they make pretty orange flowers. Common milkweed, you don't tend to see that in as many retail stores. You'll see that probably at nursery stores, or you can start your own. It's actually relatively easy to seed. It comes up from seed nicely. For those of you who are here, I will give you the seed. It's also very cheap online, so I got probably 100. I got 25 packets of seed for $25. Very cheap.
Is it easy to start the seeds at home? Do they have to be treated somehow to start them at home?
No, they don't. They come up. You can do things that make them come up faster, like I think milkweeds are easier, but some of these other are more difficult to start at home. But doing things like keeping them in the fridge for a little bit, so that'll sort of break their dormancy cycles. You can also rub them between a couple pieces of sandpaper to scratch the seed coat. You can also soak them in water, and you can do all of the above.
Okay.
Soak them in water for 24 to 48 hours prior to sowing, and that also starts to help break down that seed coat. It's a good question. Other species, New England aster, goldenrods, black-eyed Susans, and echinacea are all good. Also downy phlox, which is a native. There are some phloxes that aren't native to Wisconsin, but downy phlox is. And then also swamp milkweed too. So all your milkweeds, butterflies like. And again, what can you do to help save butterflies? They overlap somewhat with birds and the bees. Don't use pesticides. Buy organic food to, again, support lower use of pesticides on a larger area. Plant native milkweeds. Use FSC certified wood. So you'll see that symbol. It's showing up on a lot of paper products now, so just look for that and support it because they support ecological infrastructures that don't displace native habitat. And spread the word, tell your friends about this. Again, like I said about lawn management, you could do a lot just with your lawn to support native habitat by simply not practicing some of what the conventional paradigm is. So I had it a little earlier in my presentation, but I'll highlight it. Messy yards are good for insects and the environment. They may not be always nice to our conventional wisdom or our modern aesthetics of what we like to see, but messy yards are actually really good for nature and wildlife. So we can sort of all cooperate to change the paradigm a little bit. Let's see, let's move on to bees. Honeybees get talked about a lot, but we actually have a lot of different native bees, and particularly in Wisconsin we see a lot of native bumblebees. There are several different species of bumblebee native to Wisconsin. Many of them are ground nesting, so they'll actually dig holes and then you'll see them come out of it. Any Wisconsin person has seen that or stepped on a hole and angered the bees. We also have carpenter bees, sweat bees. You'll see those are little tiny ones. Those are native and important. Let's see, cellophane bees, cuckoo bees, there are many mining bees, there are lots of different kinds. You can learn more by looking up sort of the bee guide that UW Extension has online. And you can also look at the Xerces Society website to learn more about bees. So that's XERCES, Xerces Society. They have a lot of great pollinator resources. So do some online searches if you want to learn more about bees. And again, like I said, well, honeybees get talked about a lot. Our bumblebee populations, all our bee populations are in decline for the reasons I've already talked about. So what can we do to help the bees? You can enhance their nesting spots and be cautious with pesticides like I've already talked about, and you can build a pollinator garden with wildflowers, which we will get to right about now. But before I move on to how to start your own pollinator garden, I want to put in a word for fireflies. Did you know that firefly populations are declining too? I didn't know that until I was exploring the Xerces Society website. They're suffering from habitat loss and pesticide use as well. The pesticides are actually decreasing the amount of prey available to the fireflies because they are predatory. Also, there's not enough leaf litter, vegetation, and rotting logs around to sustain their prey and the firefly populations because they lay their eggs in that for the subsequent year. So it's sort of like too much cleanup is negatively affecting the fireflies. But a big one that's particular to fireflies is artificial light. Fireflies light up and they glow because that's part of their mating ritual. When we have too much artificial light from porch lights and sort of light pollution from human activities, that disrupts their mating rituals. And so it sort of disrupts their life cycle. And they can't mate as effectively, they lay less eggs, there's less habitat for them to lay their eggs in, and so on and so forth. So what you can do is set aside natural areas of your yard to provide some of that habitat. And so what I've started doing with my pollinator garden is I have it all, there's no grass in it, I've established my plants, I mulch in between plants, and then I tend to take a lot of sort of my yard litter and I put like the branches and twigs and the wood that falls from my trees. I actually throw those branches in the pollinator garden, and so it has sort of a lot of natural leaf litter. I sort of rake leaves over it in the fall, and we'll talk a little bit more about end of year cleanup of your garden and what you can do. But so I like to sort of chuck all that in my pollinator garden, and then I'm not throwing it away, I'm keeping it in the yard, it's providing habitat, it's breaking down and fertilizing my garden too. So all of that will help fireflies and all of our other native friends. And then also what you can do to help fireflies is you can maintain shade and add a water feature in your yard, and don't have lights on all night like a lot of people do nowadays. You can still have lights, but just set them up to be motion censored, or have them turn off at midnight or at some time so that you're having part of your yard be dark. I've actually seen, we have people across the road from us have a light out front, and they don't in the back of our house, and I see more fireflies in the back because it's darker, I think. So, they are native friends too, and I just wanted to highlight that because I think there's not a lot of awareness, but that's something we really appreciate about living in the Midwest. So, moving on to setting up your garden and why you're here. What you need to start. You need a full sun site. You'll benefit from having more sun. Like I just said, you want to have some shady areas of your yard, but a full sun is needed for most of these plant species that we're talking about. You'll want chemical-free soil, and you want to only use compost and organic manures as your sort of soil amendments. So stay away from anything that might be treated, and keep an eye out with a lot of these modern garden products. Make sure that it says OMRI certified or organic on the packaging, because those pesticides, even if any of the products are treated with pesticides or other chemicals, they tend to stick around in the environment for a long time, even though that may not be advertised. So if you think, well, it'll go away after a year, that's not necessarily true. So it's better to just avoid them outright. You will want to use wood mulch between plants, especially at the beginning for the first year or two. So make sure you're not getting a dyed variety because those can have chemicals as well. I advise using pine or cedar or cypress bark mulch, which is widely available and it's about the same price. Undyed mulch is actually cheaper. It tends to be cheaper than dyed mulch. And you may want a rototiller, but it's not required. There are a lot of beautiful layout ideas online. You can do little round islands in your yard by just cutting out sort of a circle area and lining it with rocks. You can do a little raised island using landscaping stone or rocks around it. You can do edges along a fence. That looks nice. You can do sort of long strips in your yard too. There's lots you can do. You can add bird feeders and bird baths into them. You can incorporate some small shrubs. So get creative, and again, just go on Pinterest or Google image search pollinator gardens, and there are lots of beautiful examples to aspire to. All right, so plant choice. Make sure you get plants that have not been treated with chemicals. You can use big box stores. They're getting better with their native plants, but maybe just ask some questions or do a little bit of research beforehand to make sure that these are plants that haven't been treated. You want to group 4 to 5 plants of the same species together. That's called planting in drifts. So when you put more of the same kind of flower together, if an insect is attracted to that particular type of plant, then they don't have to expend as much energy flying from plant to plant. If they're a little bit farther away, if they're all close together, they can eat one big meal in the same space. So that's why that's advised. And then, Michelle already asked the awesome question about how to start the seeds. It's quite cheap to get these plants if you start the seeds yourself, but it's quite a bit of work. And they take some time, and you do need a sunny spot on your deck, but you'll need to watch those seedlings. The pots can dry out really fast in full sun. I tend to advise doing it in more of a growth chamber or greenhouse setup, but then you will need some sort of plant light. Those are widely available online, and there are lots of LED lights that are called grow lights that are relatively inexpensive. Prices for those can range anywhere from $50 to up to $250, $300. So you can hang one of those somewhere in your house and then put your tray of seed starts inside, and then you can get those started in probably March, and then you'll probably have a plant that's big enough to transplant by end of May, June, I would advise. And that's much cheaper, like I said. After you incur the cost of the light, the seeds are relatively inexpensive. But if you're buying the plants, they can be $10 to $20 a piece. So you can just sort of think about the cost of each of those. Most of these seeds are widely available online. And so plants to get, showy tick trefoil is a good one. That you may want to buy from a store because those can be they sort of turn into a larger shrub, so it's nice to get a head start on that. Those are important, particularly for eastern-tailed blue skippers, and they also benefit hummingbirds and bees. Those are actually a legume too, so they'll fix nitrogen. They're pretty. Tick trefoil. Butterfly milkweed are important. They support specifically the gray hair streak butterfly, and they also support monarch larvae, bees, butterflies, many others. They make that orange flower. Monarda or bee balm makes really pretty pink flowers. It's called bergamot, wild bergamot, so it has that smell like you might have seen in tea. The leaves are very fragrant. They have that oil, bergamot oil. Pretty pink flower, and they benefit a lot of species, birds, bees, and butterflies. We'll all visit the bee balm. It's also called Monarda. That's the genus name. False indigo is important that's also a legume, very pretty. Oh, and now I've jogged my memory. The Carner blue butterflies like the wild lupin. And they really only eat or feed on wild lupin, which is also a legume. It makes a really pretty sort of 5-lobed leaf. It's very distinctive. Makes those really pretty purple spiked flowers. So wild lupin. I have seen it in the big box stores and also nurseries, so you can get it started. It also seeds itself, and it used to be pretty widespread throughout the United States. So you can start that one from seed as well. So it's lupin, Lupine. Benefits a lot of different pollinator species and is also used as an ornamental because it's very pretty. Let's see what else. Tall blazing stars, another one to look for. Cup plants or silphiums are in the sunflower family. They get big and tall and they produce a bunch of different aster looking or sunflower looking flowers. And rosin weeds, echinacea, those are a purple coneflower, black-eyed Susans. What's nice is, you can get inspiration. Go find sort of a prairie park and walk around that. There's a nice one north of Fort Atkinson, just north of Fort Atkinson on Highway 12. They have some nice prairie habitat that has all of these plants. We also have 20 acres of pollinator habitat at the Michael Fields Institute, so you can come visit us and see what ours looks like too, if you need inspiration. Alright, so once you have your plants, you want to make sure you have your plant in your pot, you have rototilled or sort of prepared your site so that the soil is loose. You've dug your hole, you want to, we've probably all planted plants before, you want to dig it so that you can fully bury the root ball. Then what's really important is to break up that root ball. So you pull it out of the pot and it's sort of all pot shaped and the roots are holding it in that shape. Make sure you sort of tousle those up and break that up because you want the roots to be in connection with your bulk soil so that they start to grow into the bulk soil. What sometimes happens if you don't do that, then there won't be sort of a good marriage between the root ball and the potting mix and your normal soil, and they'll get kind of what's called root bound. And then there's sort of pockets of air around that, and they'll end up drying out, and they're probably not going to take. So you want to, very important to break up the root ball. And then mulch around the plants with that wood mulch like we talked about to conserve moisture. And that'll also save you from having to worry so much about watering if you're transplanting it and it's hot like it has been this summer. You will want to monitor and keep it watered in years 1 and 2. However, after that, these plants are pretty drought hardy, so once they get established, you really don't need to worry about them, which is another benefit. They provide beauty, and after they're established, they just grow and are very resilient. You probably will want to weed by hand. I'm a little lax on that, ascribing to the messy yard philosophy, but also applying mulch will really keep down the weeds. Mulch also makes the weeds easier to pull, so it's just really nice from a number of standpoints. In the fall, you actually want to leave your seed stalks up. A lot of our plants that we like to garden with, particularly sedum is a really popular one. It tends to leave those leave big stalks, and even hostas, right? Those can be really important habitat for overwintering insects. Many insects will overwinter within that hollow stem, and they'll even lay their eggs. So when those are gone or when those are removed in the fall, they're disrupted, and then their populations are damaged. So I have a quote here from Tim Johnson, the lead gardener at the Chicago Botanical Garden. And he says, quote, "Allowing your perennials to remain throughout the winter can provide overwintering sites for native solitary bees. They often overwinter inside hollow stalks of standing plant material where they're protected from the weather. Many native butterflies and moths overwinter in different stages of their life cycles and can be present and very hard to see in the plant material. An early spring garden cleanup may accidentally clear them away with the debris, so consider leaving some of the standing perennials up in the spring to provide habitat for insects." So then that even gets into, in the spring, maybe wait until the weather has warmed and some of those eggs can hatch and the insects can come out. So I would advise that's more like mid to late May before you start to clean up some of that material. Like I said a little earlier, I pile a lot of my leaves from my trees in my yard into these areas, and so they actually cover a lot of that up. And then this year I sort of raked some of the leaves away. around the end of May. And then lo and behold, there were lots of beautiful shoots coming up from underneath those leaves, and we had a dry spring and there was a lot of moisture. So that's another benefit of the leaves. Again, some of those leaves even broke down, and so they were providing some fertility to my soil as well. Let's see, you can add compost in the fall or the spring. You'll just want to surface apply it. Don't worry about incorporating it. If you apply it in the fall, it will sort of break down and soak in and all that, and it'll be nice. So again, avoid pesticides with those weeds even after your pollinator garden is established. So, list of do's and don'ts. Do till your lawn or your soil to establish. That'll make your life easier. And it also helps the roots be able to explore the soil a little better and get established. Plant in drifts. That was keeping 4 or 5 species of the same kind of plant together when you plant. But do sort of over your whole garden, choose a diversity of plants in terms of bloom time. So that can range all the way from May to even late September, and then plant plants that have a bunch of different heights as well. And this all enhances the beauty factor as well. Weed by hand, but that'll probably only be necessary the first couple years. Do include herbs, and you can let them flower. So what's cool is oregano will overwinter, and it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you'll have this beautiful oregano plant that you can pick from. It also makes some little nice, purple flowers. Things like coriander, you can plant. It's a biennial, but sometimes it'll reseed itself. So coriander or cilantro. So you can put that right. You can keep your herb garden sort of inside or adjacent to your perennial garden. They serve the same purpose. And do provide water sources. Like you can put a bird bath. I have sort of a decorative little, I don't know what it is, pot. It sort of looks like a bird bath. It looks pretty. And so that the water sources can be important for the insects. And then you can keep plants deadheaded, and then that will let them bloom more. It doesn't do any harm to deadhead your plants. Don't use modern hybrids. If it says hybrid on the tag, please do avoid it. Don't use landscape fabric, as tempting as it may be, because it won't break down over time, and it can sort of harm the way the roots get established and explore the soil. Avoid removing dead stalks and leaves in the fall. Wait until late spring, and avoid those chemicals. Let's see, and then just to wrap up, you can join, if you do engage in building your own pollinator garden, you can join the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. So give that a Google online. And it's just sort of a network of like-minded individuals, and it's space to share tips and tricks and to exchange photos and other interesting tidbits. I think Master Gardeners is also a program to keep in mind for people who are interested in these sorts of things. And then you can also check out something called Weebee, W-I-B-E-E. It's an app that teaches you how to identify different bees. And it's sort of rough cut, so there's about 5 different categories. So you take a short 15-minute tutorial of how to identify these things. And then you can use the app to record visitations in your gardens. You can sit and stare at a flower for 5 to 10 minutes. That's the protocol. And then you can record who visits your garden. The app is sort of, it helps you track who's in your yard. But it's also a repository for citizen science, so you're helping sort of track our populations of native bees in Wisconsin. And that's about it, unless we have questions. But thanks for logging on, and good luck with your pollinator garden.